Everyone. So when I think of like 10 years from now, I think AI will have gotten very strong. Suppose humanity is still empowered, is still like pretty much in charge of the planet. How did we get there? Like, how is that still the case? My claim is that compute governance is an approximately necessary condition for that to happen. I have trouble coming up with a scenario that doesn't have some strong oversight over the compute infrastructure in which like AI is still under control. Why? I think software is intrinsically very hard to control. It tends to proliferate. There are lots of different agents and organizations and countries trying to build strong AI under very competitive dynamics. But software and hardware are both necessary to run them. And just like, those are bound together in people, but in machine systems, they're not. If we can't control the software, we might try, but if we can't, we should try to control the hardware. This is true, I think, whether it's a multipolar or a unipolar scenario. The unipolar scenario is still going to have to prevent lots of other agents from powerful AIs from arising. I think this compute governance, sort of controlling how much compute is available to different agents, is also an opportunity because unlike software, there's an incredibly tight bottleneck in our current compute supply chain, as you've probably seen. Like, approximately one designer of chips, approximately exactly one designer of the large-scale equipment that's necessary to do the chip manufacture, sort of one fabricator, and then like a handful of different large cloud providers at the moment. These things are starting to proliferate also, but at the moment there's an incredibly tight supply chain. There's also an opportunity in that, if you think of another scary technology that we want to constrain the supplies for, nuclear, we've controlled that fairly well. Enriched uranium is under fairly good control, and is actually much, much worse as a thing to control than compute infrastructure. Why? Like H100s are way, way, way harder to build than enriched uranium. Like, give me some billions of dollars and some time, I think I could enrich some uranium. I know I cannot build an H100. Like AMD can't build an H100. I certainly can't, and some people in like the basement in Iran cannot. Another is that things can take their hardware can take its constraints with it. You might have seen videos on YouTube of like people breaking into Apple stores and running off with a bunch of iPhones, and all the comments are like, lol, what are you going to do with all those? Because they're bricks, right? If you steal iPhones, they're bricks at this point, because they have to check in when they boot up from scratch with Apple and be activated, and they can be remotely deactivated. And if you haven't activated, or if you have deactivated one, you can't use that iPhone to do what you want. And in general, we're used to not being able to do everything we want with our phones. Some people hate this because they would like to have a jailbroken phone to do all the stuff that they want. But in general, it has provided a lot more security both for the phones themselves and for the people who may or may not lose them. So in compute security and governance, we can have two different parts of it. One is the governance part, which is like the contracts and regulations and agreements regarding use of AI specialized compute that might say, you can only have so much compute in one place, or that you have to, that you can't use this sort of computation for this sort of thing. And those are things that countries can agree on, regulations they can set up, agreements between countries, agreements between companies and labs, or just soft norms and whatever. But we can also have a verification and enforcement layer using the hardware and software cryptographic-based security measures that we already have that can make those governance contracts, regulations, agreements much more enforceable and much more lightly enforceable, because you don't have to have necessarily the government coming around and inspecting everything. You can have that happening at a more hardware and software level like it does in the iPhone. So for example, suppose we didn't want to allow lots of H100s to be brought into Russia to train some giant AI system to help with the Ukraine war. That might be something we don't want to have happen, as the United States say. So we could make export controls disallowing or limiting GPU system usage in certain locations. And we could have reporting requirements to keep track of large clusters of GPUs. But how do we stop the fact that you can nonetheless just carry, sneak the GPUs from one place to another and then use them in a place that is against the interest of the the U.S. in this case. So I'm not advocating or not this, just saying suppose that this is a desired thing. You could have the governance side, but on the security side, you could have, just like in an iPhone, something that has to has to secure boot the right operating system. This is something that H100s have, just like iPhones do, on chip as a security mechanism. This software might require permission to do computation or to connect with other GPUs. Those permissions are granted by signed messages from some external custodian, just like your iPhone checks in with Apple in order to activate. You could then check the round-trip transit times from those like they can query the GPU and get a response back. With a bunch of those, you can approximately geolocate the GPUs. And then the permission to run or connect with other GPUs can be withheld if the GPUs are not where they're supposed to be. Okay, so in this way, if you just bring an H100 somewhere that it isn't allowed to be, it will not operate, just like if you steal an iPhone. As another example, suppose we want, just in case, an off switch or a pause button for some really high-powered AI system that is not under control of the place that is, of the server or even the company that is running the system. This might be like an executive order or an international agreement that requires some external pause or off switch on very, very large models. Could be under multi-sig control if you wanted a more cooperative mode. So again, you can have GPUs that secure boot so that they need permission to do flops and connect with other GPUs. The permissions can be granted by signed messages from external custodians. Those custodians could send an off switch signal, or they could just stop sending keep computing signals. So there's a dead man's off switch. Although in this case, hopefully the men and women would live, is the idea. Okay. Another example is if you decided that you wanted a compute cap, you could do very much the same thing. You have to get permission for a certain amount of computation to run. If you hit that limit, the GPUs stop working. There are lots of other uses that you could put this to that I don't have time to go into. And I think the basic vision here is that we have core safety limits that are low level and generally out of sight. They're enforcing government regulations that have been agreed upon, not sort of primarily preventing actions in some adversarial setting. High preservation of privacy, because there's just sort of telemetry and low-level permissioning. And then lots of other regulations that might be necessary are sort of enforced and decided locally by jurisdictions and in a much more complicated way, but this base security level is happening sort of at layer 0. What do we need? I think we need a technical side, which is like demos and actual production software stack for doing these sorts of capabilities. Field building, like reports and analysis of how this could work. Policy development, what would it look to actually put policies like this in place? And policy engagement with the relevant parties that could make something like this happen. If this is something that is interesting to you, or you know someone who this would be super interesting to, we're hiring someone to be a program manager in the space, so please check out futureoflife.org about us careers, looking for that. And you can also find there a demo that we ran. FLI has been developing some of the software for this. So look for the FLI Mithril proof of concept demo, and here's some other information if you want to just learn more about this topic. Thanks.
Well, so we have time for maybe one.
There's rumors going around that there are factories in China taking gamer cards and removing the chips, or taking pre-production or intermediate production cards and moving them into like a custom ASIC or a dollar card to get around export controls. And so in that environment, do you think that an international regime is like going to overcome, the responsible players even trying to?
Yeah, I think, again, if you're in an adversarial setting, it makes this much harder. If you can have an international agreement with China that includes we're all going to govern our AI chips, that is a very different thing. So I would not say, so I think there's always a difficult thing with the US because the way to get things done is through national security and geopolitical competition. That is not necessarily the best way for things to happen for the world. So I think in my 2024 future where AI is under control, that is the US and China cooperating, not in an adversarial relationship over AI.
Thank you so much. And